Hello everyone, today we are going to look at the B minor chord on ukulele, how you play it, how you can make it easier for yourself and some alternate ways to play it as well. And for good measure I think we'll throw in the B chord as well. So let's get to a close-up and let's learn how to play the B minor chord. So I've just moved a little closer in and we're going to take a look at the standard B minor chord. So the B minor chord, like all minor chords, is just made up of 3 notes. Same, all major, all minor chords are made up of 3 notes. So we have a B, obviously, and we have a D, and we have a G flat. So the standard way to play a B minor chord is to use a bar. So this is usually one of the first bar chords that beginners and newcomers to ukulele come across, is the B minor. And that's because it works so well with, I guess, all the early chords that you learn when you come to start learning ukulele. So you've got 2 options here. You can bar all of the strings at fret 2 using your index finger like this. So I'm just laying that across fret 2 like so, and then I'm going to squeeze, and I'm just going to, there's a slight rotation backwards. It's a very slight rotation. So that's all of those strings barred, and then I'm going to use my 3rd finger and I'm going to drop it on the 4th fret of the G string. That is a string closest to the ceiling. And that's your B minor. It's quite a nice chord. Now, there are a couple of ways to play the bar here, like I just mentioned. You can either bar all of the strings, like so, or you can actually just bar the bottom 3 strings. So you don't necessarily need to bar the top string because your 3rd finger is going to pick up that string anyway. I'd probably argue that it's probably a little bit easier in the first instance to bar all of the strings. So that is your B minor chord. So the notes from the top going down, so starting on the G string, we've got a B note there. We've got a D note here, and we have a G flat there, and the final note, the bottom string, is another B. So what that means is that if you've seen any of my lessons before, you'll know that actually we only need to play 3 of those notes. So if we wanted to make this chord a little bit easier, we could maybe just play 3 of the strings. We just need to make sure we've got that B in there, that D in there, and that G flat. And that's perfectly acceptable. And much like when we looked at the D chord, we could actually just bar these bottom 3 strings, so the C string, the E string and the A string, and strum the bottom 3 strings. That's a B minor right there. We're not having to worry about this 3rd finger at all. And a little tip here is actually if you just push this finger up a little bit, so it's just resting on the top string but not actually pressing it down, it will mute that string. So if I try and pluck that string now, not really getting any sound out of it, which means I can strum all of the strings. That's one way. Or we could just play the top 3 strings and leave the bottom string unplucked. Not a huge help on the B minor because we're having to bar that string anyway. So there's a couple of ways to potentially make that B minor a little bit easier. But now let's have a look at some alternate fingerings for the B minor chord. So the bad news when it comes to B minor is, unfortunately, I believe this version, which we've just learned, is probably the easiest version to play. That said, I am going to show you a few others. So let's take a look at this version which starts on the 5th fret. So we're going to use our index finger on the bottom string, so that is on the A string. We're going to use our 2nd finger at the 6th fret of the C string. Our 3rd finger is going to be on the 7th fret of the G string, and our pinky finger is going to be on the 7th fret of the E string. That's a B minor too. Quite a difficult one, but I still would recommend giving it a little bit of time. Maybe if you're a complete newbie and you've not been playing that long, come to it later on because that's quite a difficult chord to play. And now we're going to look at a version that starts on the 6th fret. So I'm going to put my index finger on the 6th fret of the C string, my 2nd finger on the 7th fret of the G string, my 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the E string, and my pinky finger on the 9th fret of the A string. So you should be able to hear the sound differences there. So from, you can hear it's the same chord, but there's a brightness when I'm playing it up around this 6th fret. And finally, there is a way to play this up at the 9th fret, So we would here start with our index finger on the 9th fret of the A string, our second finger on the 10th fret of the E string, and then we would need our pinky and our third finger at fret 11 on the top 2 strings. Quite a difficult one, this, but very, very bright. So there are a few alternatives to play it. If you're new to playing ukulele and you're just encountering B minor for the first time, we're just going to worry about this one down here. So that is barred fret 2 and our third finger on the 4th fret of the G string. If you've been watching this lesson and you're thinking, oh, this is very similar to the A minor chord, it is. It's based on the exact same shape. So what we're doing here is we're effectively taking your standard A minor chord, which is just your second finger on the 2nd fret of the G string and all the other strings are open. And we're effectively just sliding that whole shape up 2 frets, which is why our bar needs to come in, because we're replicating the note. If you're struggling with bar chords, I have got a video on how to get better at bar chords. And one thing I would recommend as well is, as you're getting this down, just pluck each string separately. Make sure they're all ringing out. If you pluck each one separately, you'll start to hear if one sounds like you're not quite fretting it properly. So if you hear something like this, you could hear the 2 middle strings there weren't sounding properly, so I know there's an issue there. So I maybe just need to adjust my finger shape a little bit. Definitely worth checking your chords as you get to grips with them. So now let's take a look at the B chord, and we're doing this because the B chord is so similar to the B minor chord. So those of you already familiar with an A chord, which is our second finger, the 2nd fret of the G string, and our first finger, the 1st fret of the C string. If you're familiar with that, the B chord is essentially that, up 2 frets. So I'm going to swap these 2 fingers, so swap my 1st and 2nd finger for my 2nd and 3rd finger, exactly the same. So I'm still playing an A. Just using different fingers now. What that will allow me to do is just slide that up 2 frets. So I can slide up 1, slide up 2, and then I'm just going to need to lay my index finger down on that 2nd fret, barring across all of them. And that's a B chord. So again, we have our option here of maybe not barring all of fret 2 and maybe just barring the bottom 2 strings this time, which tends to be quite easy and quite comfortable. So if you're really having difficulty with a bar chord when it comes to a B chord, you can part bar the bottom 2 strings. So much like the B minor chord, which we learned earlier on, and we realised that we could actually drop and make it a little bit easier by just playing 3 notes rather than playing all 4 strings at the same time, we can effectively do exactly the same here. So in the instance of our B chord, if you're having difficulty with this bar, you can not play the bar at all, and we could just play our 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the G string, our 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the C string, and our index finger on the 2nd fret of the E string, and not play the A string at the bottom. Just strum those top 3 strings. That's a B. No bar involved, and it works quite nicely. Alternatively, we could do the opposite of that. We could use our 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the C string, and we could just bar these bottom 2 strings here with our index finger at the 2nd fret and not play the top string. Again, that's a perfectly acceptable B. So there are a couple of ways of getting around it, one which doesn't use a bar at all. So you can see the similarities there between our B minor and our B chord. So hopefully you've learned a few things there, and hopefully you will advance and progress and get your B minor and your B chord a little bit better. Just stick with it. All these things always just take time and a little bit of practice. I always recommend the 60-second changes tip. If you don't know that one, that is set yourself a timer for 60 seconds, pick 2 chords, so we'll take our B minor and we'll just take a different chord, for example a C, and change between those chords as many times as you possibly can. You find 60 seconds purely focused on changing to a new chord will really help you develop much quicker than just throwing it in the middle of a song. As always, thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you find my videos useful, I would hugely appreciate subscribes, likes, anything like that. It really helps me. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.